right, this is too good. We're just going to get going right away. I'm Jay Weidner. You're listening to Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. We're talking to Cliff High, and we're talking about his work and Patrick Garrell's work on magnetics of the sun and how this is probably the key to understanding the physics around what's going to happen in 2012. And the Nazis were obsessed by all this stuff, and I've been following that story for a long time. And your discovery of the swastika type motion, looking down from the north of this magnetic thing, it just strikes me because, the Nazis have the black sun, and they have a lot of solar kind of myths and motifs. And when Hitler visited Henday in 1940, I don't think I put this in the book, but he actually, the first thing he did as soon as the train car pulled into Henday was walk straight up to the Cross of Henday.
Very interested then, yeah. Well, I know that they took it actually from the Jane. The swastika actually was taken for the National Socialist Party from the symbols on the Jane palm, all of which are associated within the Jane cosmology with the sun and periodic catastrophes.
Yes, and Jainism is really comes as like a hybrid of Dravidian culture, which carried on a lot of the traditions that speak about a catastrophe. In fact, they're the creators of the Yuga system and all of that. So it's very interesting how all this begins to dovetail together.
It's scary, yeah. Yeah, if it was just one or two cultures, and then you could convince yourself you were being nuts, that kind of thing. But repeatedly getting kicked in the head by all of this, and then seeing the non-random numbers, the continuous repetition from the Norse myths all the way through the Hindus and the Mayans for the irrational component of the numbers associated with the sunspot cycle, and it's like there's a big in there.
Yeah. The thing that people really have to understand, and it's very important because if you don't understand this, you won't get the rest of it. There really has to have been an advanced culture, a very advanced culture, in the distant past. And they figured all this out and did everything they could to pass that information down. And once you understand that, then everything begins to click together. But the key is to not look at it with your own filters, to try to look at it with what they were trying to tell us and not with what you think they were trying to tell us. And I think that's what you did. You looked at this with a clear head, and it's very, very frightening. I don't know what to say. I want to order one of your boats. I can get to 10,000 feet, but in about 20 minutes from where I live. But I don't know.
Well, there's the issue. If this is as devastating as it seems to be, and there appears to be in another cycle within these cycles of cataclysms. In other words, every other one appears to be not quite so bad. Right. And then we're at the point of one of the bad ones, unfortunately. And if you look at things like the Narmer Plate, we're at the 12th cycle there. They actually record 11 previous cataclysms. And the only other group to do that is actually this northern Siberian myth that records also 11 previous cataclysms. And that even actually records the one where Siberia was slipped in under the ice, and has a little bit in there about having to flee from the ice that overcame them in just days and just simply wouldn't cease, and how they had to basically run as a tribe from it. But no, it's all quite frightening. The idea of survival, though, does exist because we've done it before. I'm of the opinion that humans go back at least 8 million years on this planet. And there's demonstrable evidence from my relatives' area in California of this. I mean, they used to do gold mining in the area, and they'd go down to to layers that had been covered over by mountains 8 million years ago, and they would find modern Homo sapiens skeletons in the gravel beds. Some of them even with clothing still sort of hanging on. So, they didn't put them in there any other way. They weren't swept into the gravel recently. And so if that's the case, then we have to say, well, we've been through it so repeatedly that you're probably correct. There was probably a master civilization maybe 40 or 50,000 years back that set things in motion in terms of trying to preserve this, which basically leads us up to the perversions of the Freemasonry idea today.
And the creation of what religions are really about, which is passing on this message and trying to make people, in a way, fearless, because one day you're going to have to be fearless to survive this kind of thing. How many days long does this take, do you think? This first one, are we going to get hit by a coronal mass ejection, and then we're going to get hit by the other things? Or
it's all part of a process. There will probably be a bow wave, and then that instantly or completely or being driven by it, pushing it, will be the CME, and then we'll get the flips of the magnetics, and then the crustal action. And there's some suggestions that 40 or 50 days is not unlikely. However, the actual flip of the crust is probably a 40 to 50 hour process based on my reading of the historical records that are available to be gotten at in this. The issue is the whole process, though, can be thought of as probably a year long, because the build-up to it is quite exceptional. I had the good fortune when I was a kid to be, or bad fortune, I don't know, whatever, to be stuck in Germany as one of the earliest of the dependents of the occupation forces, and was forced to read a lot because there just wasn't a whole lot else to do. And I came across a bunch of books that were stored in this old SS building that we used as a library where we were stationed there. And some of these books were really interesting, and they had translations of languages I'd never seen before as a kid. And they were done for the German military. And it was strange books, and some of them were obviously done by people that were prisoners of the Germans. One, a British fellow who made annotations in his translations as he went along. And he translated a bunch of Sanskrit. And I read these marvelous stories about this civilization, which I now know to be probably the Harappan civilization, that were discussing about this particular village, and it was from the viewpoint of this headmaster who had all of this stuff set down. And he was the guy who controlled the size of the bricks. That's how basically their hierarchy was in the masonry, but it was about building the houses and stuff. But in any event, he talks about a period where the houses fell over because of a big earthquake. No big deal, they rebuilt them. Well, 3 weeks later, they all fell over again because of another big earthquake, so they rebuilt them again. And it goes on and on this way until about 3 or 4 months later, they're getting an earthquake a day, and finally everybody's living in tents because there's just no point in rebuilding the houses anymore. And it was then that the translator of that particular book tied that over to another book that he translated for the Germans that was related to the myth of Manu, the survivor by a boat. And so, going back, they were intimately and desperately interested in this information.
And that carries forth into NASA. NASA is desperately interested in this information. Of course, the Nazi German scientists were at the beginning of NASA, which is another incredibly interesting subject. We'll be right back. I'm Jay Weidner. You're listening to Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. We're talking to Cliff High. We'll be back for the crescendo, the allegro or something of the show.